Hi folks, so a couple of weeks ago I realised that I had enough motors to build a whole new quad, and so I thought I'd take advantage of that. I'd had my eye on a frame at Banggood for a little while now. That was the purple RealAcc frame, and this provided the opportunity for me to take advantage of that situation. So the frame is on its way, and when it gets here I'm going to rebuild a couple of the other quads that I have using parts out of those and putting them into the purple frame, and so what I need to do is prepare for that now. So this video is about taking two of my current quads apart and rebuilding one of them in preparation so that I have parts available to build the purple when it arrives. And so here we start. We've got my current racing frame. Now, I don't do a lot of racing and I'm not very good at racing, and so this frame really is underutilized. The motors are underutilized, and you know, it's wasted. So I'm going to use the most powerful motors and ESCs I have in the Acro frame, the purple frame. And the reason for that is because I'm going to put my RunCam 3 on top of it and put the next level motors down onto this frame here. What I'm doing is I just take off the antenna, take out the screws that are holding the pod on. These are regular bolts. The other frame I have self-tappers, which actually work quite well. Now I need to get into the pod by removing the VTX and also the camera. Once that's done, I can just move the capacitor out of the way and then take off the little nuts that are holding the protective plate on. And then with those nuts gone, I can take that plate off and just take the antenna wires out from the sides. And I need to take the bolts off that are holding the PDB in place and take off the bottom ones as well. Now with that done, I'm going to have to take the props off because I want to take the motors off, and with the props in place it just is a pain in the ass to work on. Just take off the battery strap, get rid of that. That gets in the way. Now just removing all the motor screws, the motor bolts. This motor here I got to, and one of the bolts is stripped out, so I actually have to get the get a set of pliers and physically twist them around with the pliers to get the bloody thing out. You know, that was a bit of a pain in the ass. Now with all the motor bolts out and all the screws and various bits and bobs kicking about, I thought it was just ideal time to tidy those up, put them into the middle of that tape there. Now I'm just taking the cable ties off. These actually hold the antenna wires in place for the receiver. Then this one on the back was just holding the power in place. Slice through the electrical tape. These are holding the ESCs on. And just strip all that off. So with the ESCs all unwrapped, I can basically now just take that entire powertrain off, put it on the bench, and it's good to go. So there's the powertrain, and I'll just safely put that away. This frame has got the motors on that I realised I had 4 of, and I started building this just as a test frame until I thought I'd get the RealAcc Purple. So I'm just removing the signal and power wires from the ESCs to the PDB and the flight controller. Now this PDB is the one that I'm going to use in the racing machine. I'm just tidying up the solder and removing the existing power leads. Just give those a tidy up as well. Now this, I've cut out a hole in the side of the pod on this frame. So I'm going to put the PDB sideways like I had the old one. On the frame I had an all-in-one flight controller, so I had to have the rubberized mounts for anti-vibration, and I'm going to replace those with solid mounts and then put the PDB on and then put the flight controller on top of that. So I'm going to put the receiver underneath the PDB on this frame, and that just makes room on top. So this is the PDB going in. I've got some solid mounts that I'm going to use for those. Sorry, I've got some rubberized mounts that I'm going to use to hold that in place, and then the flight controller goes on top. And I'm just going to do a test fit of the pod here, so to make sure that there's room under the pod for everything I need. Looks like it's all good. So this is the backup racing quad that I have. This is the one that's got the ZMX motors that I'm going to use on my racing frame. And again, I need to get in there, get rid of the cables to the VTX and to the camera. Once I'm in there, I've cable tied everything into place, and I just need to get rid of that. Unplug everything, and the pod is good to go. So once I'm there, I take off the rubberized grommets, and I just need to unsolder. I just need to unsolder the signal and ground wires for the ESCs. Right, now with the flight controller out of the way, we can unsolder the power wires for the ESCs. And I'll just quickly go through and do the others. Right, with that done, I just need to get rid of the rubberized mounts holding down the PDB, so I can get in and get the other power wires off. Right, get rid of this props on these motors. Right, so that's the first motor taken off. I'll now install that onto the racing frame. So I'll just put a couple of bolts in for now, just to hold it in place. And luckily for me, the power wires were just long enough to reach the PDB. They could probably do with being another few millimeters longer, but it'll do for now. I'll just solder those into place. With that done, I can solder into place the ground lead. Now there's all four done. So off here I need to take the camera and VTX loom, and that's powered directly off the battery, so I just need to unsolder that from the battery terminals like so. While I'm here, I'll get the capacitor as well. Right, I'm going to put a new set of power leads onto this frame. The other ones were a bit ratty. I'll change the XT60 eventually. Now, if you guys haven't seen these trimmers, they're actually worth getting. Really, really handy. Right, just tin the leads. Probably could have done with having a bit of a hotter soldering iron. It took a little bit longer than it should have, but it was okay. Right. So I was trying to solder the power lead into place. Took 2 or 3 different angles, 2 or 3 different methods, 2 or 3 different tries, and eventually I came up with coming in from the top and heating the solder in the hole of the PDB from the bottom. That seemed to work quite well. Right, with that done, just tidy up the solder so it's not a big lumpy mess. Now, I've got a capacitor on there just to smooth out the video, and if you don't have enough solder holding the capacitor in place, they can come adrift, so I'm just making sure that there's a nice fat dollop of solder on each capacitor lead. Now, with the camera and VTX loom, I just need to straighten that up. It was a bit untidy, a bit tangled, so untangle that and then just tidy up the power connector, the power leads. Those get soldered directly to the battery terminals. Just making sure again that there's plenty of solder holding those in place. Nothing worse than having the power to your VTX come adrift while you're flying. So here's the flight controller that I'm going to be using in this. It's a Lux clone. They're powered also directly from the battery. So before I go any further, I'll just solder up the receiver. This is an XM Plus. So do the power, which is 5 volts. Do the ground, and we'll just do the yellow one, which goes to UART number 2, the receive port. And while I'm at it, I'll do the other signal and ground wires for the other ESC. And this is another ESC finally being put into place. If you don't have any tweezers, I recommend getting some. They're really, really handy for this fiddly work. Right, there's the smart audio. If you don't use smart audio, do. It's really, really useful. So I'm just getting the power and ground wires through for the flight controller, and as I say, these get wired directly also to the battery terminals. So tweezer those, hold it in position, and just make sure that there's a nice dollop of solder holding that. Trim the ground, just nick that off with my fingers. That's the beauty of using silicon wire. Give that bit of solder on the end to tin it up, and using my tweezers just solder that into position as well. Just realised that I'd rather have the smart audio cable run underneath the PDB, underneath the flight controller to make it a bit tidier. So I'll just pass that under, use my tweezers to grab the connector and pull that through. And with the other side I want the camera cable to also go underneath the flight controller, so I'll just lift that flight controller up and push it past the post. Now I need to get that smart audio cable back out and resolder that back up. Put the nuts back on, make sure that flight controller is nice and tight. Pass the camera lead through. Pass the VTX lead through, and just solder that into place. Normally I would do this before I put the flight controller on, but because the Lux has a scalloped profile to it, you can actually get to the solder pads on the PDB much easier, and it's okay to do it like this. So just solder in place the camera. Right, we just need to finish off the last two ESC signal and ground leads and check that those are nice and snug. And there we go, those are all done. So the last thing that we need to do before we plug power into it is just do a continuity test. Put your multimeter on continuity, you plug those in, and if you don't get a beep, then you have no continuity, which is good. I do like to go around and just make sure that we have continuity between the various grounds and the various powers, and we don't have continuity between ground and power. And also just check that we have continuity between the PDB and the flight controller to make sure that it's going to spark up when we plug the battery in. So once that's all done, I'll then plug in my smoke stopper. You probably don't need the smoke stopper after doing a continuity test, but it's just an extra level of safety really. And with that in place, we can plug in the battery, and hey presto, we've got power. Now, of course, I hadn't configured, because I'd reflashed the flight controller, I hadn't configured it to use the right serial port. So I just had to quickly go and do that in Betaflight. So with that all done, we can arm the quad. Yep, we've got success, and yes, we have the motor spinning. So that's good. That's done. That's the transplant of the powertrain done. And from here on in, it's just a matter of hooking up all the other bits and then configuring it. Thanks.